Thanks, folks, for joining us for today's webinar on integrating Claris FileMaker with almost anything. We're obviously going to cover a smaller set of integrations than that, but hopefully we'll whet your appetite for what's possible. Let's go ahead and go through a quick set of introductions and housekeeping slides. If you're new to Zoom, which would be shocking in this world and day and age, then you just want to point out you might have a slightly different interface, but there's going to be various features at the bottom of the screen, maybe the top right or left corner, to let you control audio, captions, Q&A, and chat. So go ahead and explore those features. We do have a colleague, Abby, who's with us, who's kind of monitoring the Q&A to help us kind of stay on top of that. We'll probably handle most of those questions at the end of today's conversation. If you get stuck and you need help, go ahead and put something in the chat there to the hosts and panelists, and we'll do our best to help troubleshoot. But generally, the biggest issues you'll have will be audio, and you'll find the settings there in the bottom corner of your screen. So some quick introductions. I'm joined here by my colleague, Greg Lane. We've worked together for a couple decades almost at this point. He's the Chief Technical Officer at Skeleton Key, certified FileMaker developer. He's been building databases since I graduated high school and loves fishing, kayaking, and living on the lake. I'm Mark Richmond. I'm the CEO and founder of Skeleton Key. I'm also a developer, but I don't develop much these days. I mostly architect, design, and consult. I used to do IT, security, and networking and consulting, so a little bit technical on that side of things before I got into development. I have 4 sons, 2 pups, and love sushi. Let's get to why we're here today and what's in it for you. So you all know this. You guys are using lots of different apps, and your clients are as well, right? Whether you're an in-house developer, you're a developer, or you're an actual user of these systems, you probably look at your toolbar and see tons of different apps. And you are probably the person who connects those apps together, ensuring that they're communicating or exchanging information. So that means a lot of copying and pasting, importing, exporting, and typing. And integrations eliminate that busy work, the work that really isn't the most valuable work that you can do. The most valuable resources in your organizations are your people, and they have skills and knowledge and critical thinking skills, and you need software to be smarter and talk to each other to do the mundane, everyday stuff that really eats up your time. And FileMaker can either orchestrate that between different apps, or it can actually be at the center of this, if it's one of your primary tools, pushing and pulling information as necessary so you can stay focused on a single app without having to necessarily go all over the place and deal with those other apps when you need to. And this isn't a problem that's necessarily getting easier. In fact, it's probably going to get harder. There's more and more apps being born all the time. Every time I look at the cluster of application icons on my screen, I immediately see this Hubble photograph in my head because it is dense. And now there are single stars in there. There are also star systems or clusters, and then there are galaxies, which have enormous billions of stars. And in some ways, this isn't meant to sound too hyperbolic. There are over 9 billion mobile apps out there. And of course, beyond that, there's probably equally hundreds of thousands of other desktop apps that augment that. Over 2 billion websites, many of which, in fact, are platforms that you interact with and are actually applications that are just web-based. And the year-over-year growth in the SaaS market is about 19%. So even if it's gone kind of through ups and downs, it steadily grows both in terms of the number of apps that are available, as well as the number of people who are adopting them. So we don't see any signs of this slowing down. In addition, we've all run into apps which are legacy apps, right? Older accounting packages or older ERPs or CRMs that really don't talk to other apps. And we consider replacing them, and then we discover often that the manufacturers of those apps are actually retrofitting those apps to provide us options for integrating them with other tools, because they see the writing on the wall that if they don't do that, their apps are going to go away and be replaced. So the need and the opportunity for integration is just growing and expanding all the time. So we're going to dive into a series of use cases. I'm going to let Greg take it from here, and I'll join at the end of each one to give him a brief break and sort of wrap it up. So Greg, your turn.
So I don't have any live demos today because I have kind of a reputation for crashing servers when I do live demos and presentations like this. And that's kind of a well-deserved reputation, I guess. But we're going to look at 6 different organizations across a variety of industries and show how we help them combine their FileMaker systems with other apps and platforms. In some cases, the integration work was a small part of what we did in those overall FileMaker solutions. In other cases, the integration was like the main feature and the reason that we were doing the work with them. The first one we're going to talk about is an organization that manages online auctions. They sell large, often expensive items. And another developer in the community actually built much of this FileMaker system and kind of handed that client off to us to take it to the next level. The FileMaker solution is used for managing all of the auction listings, the detailed descriptions, the photos, all of that stuff. And it syncs that data to a MySQL database with a custom website that manages all of the auctions, the bids, the bidders, and syncs that information back to FileMaker for handling the final paperwork on the sale and things like that. So lots of integration there between FileMaker and the MySQL database, as well as pushing photos and things like that back and forth to keep that system working smoothly. One specific need that they had is they do a lot of paperwork related to these sales. There's titling and other legal requirements that they have to do when they complete these sales. So they were managing lots of documents that required signatures and often doing that through email, sending things back and forth. And it was a slow, tedious process, prone to error, and not a lot of fun for anyone. So we built a new process for them that integrates with Dropbox Sign. So the user in FileMaker can initiate a document that needs to be signed. They send it to the correct person. That person logs in through the website. They get an email notification, takes them to the website with a link to sign one or more documents that they're required to sign. That takes them to Dropbox Sign, where they can read the document, sign their name, maybe click a checkbox or two as part of that process. And this saves them a ton of time and makes the process just much more automated and smooth to keep everything legal and where it needs to be. So this diagram kind of illustrates the major components that are involved in this integration. The FileMaker system is the hub for everything. The employees at the organization primarily use FileMaker Pro, connect to FileMaker Server, do all of their work through that environment. And then FileMaker reaches out to Dropbox Sign, to the website, and sends lots of emails and things like that to coordinate everything.
So I'll jump in and share. So kind of a quick recap there, give Greg a chance to rest his voice. We've got hundreds of documents. I think one of my developers was saying the other day, it could peak at 600 different transactions in a given month, maybe as low as a couple hundred if it's in a slow period, but there's a seasonality to their business. Previously, that was all being emailed back and forth. So all those 600 different transactions required multiple emails, multiple rounds of follow-up, multiple checks to see whether or not a customer had received and signed and completely filled it out properly. Huge amounts of time being spent. And of course, troubleshooting and chasing down customers was never fun. Doing this direct integration on top of the existing integrated website they have eliminated that. It allows them to initiate that process with a click of a button and to monitor the status of things that are falling behind by being notified and being able to check that through a dashboard. No longer do they have to go and spend their time chasing down customers or digging through their inbox to manage this process. So the biggest results here and the biggest ROI they get for the investment that was made was their users are doing much more valuable work, focusing on the auctions and the customers and the opportunities to sell. And they're not spending time chasing down. And there's a much better signature experience for customers who used to get emails with documents that they had to find a way to sign and print and scan or whatever it is they were doing to get that done manually with all the errors that comes up. Now the customers have a much smoother experience, more professional experience. A conservative estimate is that they're saving about $120,000. This is based on maybe 400 transactions a month, maybe $25 an hour for an hour's worth of time doing that. And that's a pretty conservative number, given that they often have bigger peaks, and it might be that the more expensive employees are doing that work. On top of that, it's really hard to put a value on the customer satisfaction that's gained or the more valuable work, the lost opportunity that they can now pursue with those same personnel in terms of growth or process improvement or quality control or sales, whatever it is those folks are doing. They're not slave to their computers working on the sort of mundane, busy work associated with all that document chasing.
So the next example we've got is a city in our area that has a really extensive FileMaker system that's used across multiple departments in their organization. The one of the specific things that we helped with was the permit application and payment process. So the FileMaker system has tracked this for years, and it was largely based on a paper form process that they've used for many, many years. But they wanted a kind of a self-service portal, something that takes a lot of the manual effort out of that. So we built a client-facing web portal using FM Better Forms that provides a much richer experience for the business owners and residents to come in, complete the application they need to do for a permit, and make payments for those permits as well. So we integrated several systems together. One of the things that we had to do because of a new IT security policy that the organization had was to implement multi-factor authentication for the FM Better Forms website that we built. So what we did is we added to the login process after the user enters their email address and their password and clicks the login button, they get an SMS text message, and this goes through Twilio. So once they log in here, we're initiating a process in the back end to generate a code. We send that through a text message to the user, and then they get a screen where they enter their code here. Everybody's seen this kind of experience with your insurance company or whatever, but it's the same kind of thing that we implemented, added it into FM Better Forms and using Twilio to integrate that in the back end. Another thing we did is the payment processing. So part of this is in the FileMaker solution. They generate an invoice and want to send that to a resident or a business owner to make a payment for that invoice. So they initiate that here in FileMaker. That sends an email notification to the recipient. It may include a PDF attachment, but it does include a payment link. The user can click on that payment link that redirects them to the FM Better Forms website where they can enter their payment details. And then that information flows back into FileMaker where users can see the status of that invoice and its payment details and all of that stuff right inside the FileMaker interface. So a couple other things that we're using here that I may not have mentioned is we're using Mailgun, which is another REST API that we're connecting to send lots and lots of email from the system for reminders and notifications, invoices, lots of different things get sent out through Mailgun. Elevon is the payment processor that they're using to handle the payments, and obviously Twilio to send the SMS messages and FM Better Forms. All of these things are talking together. And again, FileMaker is at the center of this as the hub for all of this.
So kind of in summarizing this whole use case, the website didn't meet IT security requirements, and that's no fault of FM Better Forms. I think we see that a lot, especially custom systems aren't necessarily being kept to the same standards. And often the platforms and technologies you use leave that to the developer to implement. And when you're doing it to a public-facing solution like this one does, you don't have the benefit of a centralized administration system like Azure AD or Office 365 and or Google or Amazon or some other place where you can control the user population's login and multi-factor. In this case, you have to find a way to add that to the system for the public. I can't underestimate the cost and risk associated with that. It's not just the risk of an account being compromised. There's actually insurance costs associated with that. We know ourselves with our own cyber insurance that we have as an organization that the degree to which we can certify that our systems are properly secured is a challenge as well. And so we have to ensure that we're doing everything we can and error all the different places that we manage information and accounts to provide the level of security that those insurance companies want to keep our costs down. Payment processes were time consuming, and both of those things meant a lot of the customers in this very large municipality were reaching out to the staff who were there to do permits and violations and other types of clerical work associated with running the actual government to do IT support or to help them run a card. And this is not the best use of their time. They have a lot more that they should be doing associated with those permits, violations, buildings, occupancy, and other things like that. And so it was a big drain on the resources and basically created a really terrible experience and therefore affected the impact about how people felt about their the service they were getting from their government entities. Integrating with Twilio and Elevon improved that customer security. It also allowed our customers to handle their payments themselves, which is what we all expect to be able to do these days. So you don't have to give your card information to a stranger across a desk. You don't have to go in somewhere physically to actually do it. And you can do it yourself and with whatever tool or method that you prefer. And so the results of that were not only enhanced security and compliance and lower insurance risks and likely lower insurance costs, um, but a better experience for the customers and a reduced burden on the staff so they could focus on more valuable work. So again, using some simple back of the envelope math, we estimate the annual labor savings on the staff itself was at least $200,000 a year, because this is a very large municipality, hundreds of thousands of people who live there, lots of businesses and commercial activity going on that also requires permits, so that there's outsiders coming into the municipality to do work who are also coming to this portal and working with this group. And hours upon hours were being spent servicing those folks for simple things like logging in, resetting passwords, and dealing with payment processes. All of that work no longer is required for the staff. And of course, people prefer it. We've actually heard, as an aside, I'm in some business peer groups here locally. And in one of those groups, I was talking and giving an example and telling this story to kind of help people understand. And I had someone across the room say, "You guys built that?" Because they were a commercial plumber. They were going around to the various 27 municipalities in the St. Louis region. And the only one that stood out as having this process that was easy to use for the volume of activity that a commercial contractor like him and a residential contractor like him might have to use was this municipality. And in their experience, all the other municipalities had a terrible, slow, wait online, wait your turn experience. And compared to the one we had built here, it was easy and they preferred it. So anytime they got jobs here, they really loved it.
All right, the next example we've got is a property management company. And this organization receives repair requests from tenants. It's one of the things they do, of course. And they need to route those repair requests to a contractor who can fulfill that service and keep the tenant notified about what's happening. So we used a number of tools to tie together here to make this work. And let me show you a few screens and kind of walk through this process. So basically on the company's website, there's a form, repair request form. This is a form stack form that is embedded in their website. It's pretty simple, but it allows the tenant to fill out their information about the repair that they need. When they submit that form, and it can also include photos, I don't have the whole screen on here, but they can upload photos that go along with that repair request to show a picture of the broken faucet or whatever it might be. And the data from that form and the attachments goes directly into FileMaker. So it goes through a Claris Connect webhook and then is pushed into FileMaker, where there's a record created for the repair. The attachments that were submitted with the form come into FileMaker as well. And then this begins a series of automated notifications or messages. So mostly they use SMS, but there's also email involved here, depending on the specific tenant and their communication preferences. But a lot of the communication goes through SMS messages. The FileMaker user can send a manual message to the tenant or a contractor. There are also some automated messages that go out to acknowledge the request and things like that. And there's a detailed log that's kept of exactly what communication has been sent and when, and lots of details there that make the process that was followed for this repair really clear. Once the repair has been completed, there's a follow-up survey that's sent out automatically to the tenant. This is another form stack form. They get a link in an email or in an SMS message, and it allows them to rate their satisfaction and rate their whether the repair was handled correctly, rate their experience with the contractor, and so forth. And then that data also goes back into FileMaker so that they can run reports and see satisfaction ratings for different contractors and things like that over time. So here we're using FormStack, obviously, and that's for the tenant. That's their primary interface with the system, is just those FormStack forms. And then they receive messages through email and SMS. But in the back end, those FormStack results are going through Claris Connect back into FileMaker, and then the users at the organization are using FileMaker Pro to interact with that data. Twilio is being used in the back end, as well as email to send messages to users and contractors as needed.
I made the classic Zoom mistake and I didn't unmute myself. The scenario here is we have a customer, they've got not just single properties, they've got lots of properties. And part of their business model is to find investors to acquire other properties that they manage. So this is a growing and scaling business that keeps adding new properties, therefore new landlords, new tenants. And as a result, because the locations of these properties, new suppliers. And so it's a problem that they saw scaling and becoming problematic. All of that communication back and forth with those various players and any type of issue, whether it's a service request or whether it is just notifying someone about a renewal or a lease or a change in fees, whatever it is, was all being done manually. And even if they tried using various technologies for shared inboxes and such, it was really difficult to keep track of the back and forth. Plus, emails kind of dated and people get tons of it. And there are times when you need really quick responses, and maybe the tenants they were having were expecting something that was more digital. So implementing FormStack for capturing information consistently, in this case also with multiple language support because they had a diverse clientele, as well as using, so FormStack gave us that ability and made that much easier for us to implement the language support. And the Twilio SMS capability in both directions. So we've had other solutions we've done with SMS just going outbound, but in this case, they needed it to be able to actually process responses back into the system. Really allows them to stay in FileMaker and see that communication log, like Greg was saying, and stay on top of all this without all of that activity. And that whole change in the way they communicated with their customers really kind of greased the wheels for their ability to capture feedback. Right? If it's already really challenging to communicate and get services done for yourself as a tenant, you can imagine the last thing you'd want to do is go out of your way to use a similarly clunky process to provide feedback. But by using the same mechanisms for communication, they're now able to get more consistent feedback from the customers and therefore know how those suppliers are doing, ensure that they're using the right people to provide services on their behalf, and improve customer satisfaction. So again, we did some simple back of the envelope math. Based on the volume and growing pattern that we see in communications with these customers and the number of service transactions they have, again, using a relatively conservative estimate on the hourly cost for these valuable employees who have much more to do, like grow the business, we estimate their savings about a $250,000 in labor savings each year, and increased customer satisfaction, both in terms of the user's experience and the quality of the suppliers that they're able to provide based on the feedback that they get.
So the next example we're going to look at is QuickBooks integration. And this is not a specific client, but it's a common story that applies to lots of different clients. And there are lots of different tools that we can use inside of FileMaker to integrate with QuickBooks, both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. Claris Connect has pretty rich connectors available for working with QuickBooks Online. But we've also used third-party plugins like LedgerLink and FMBooks Connector. There are others out there in the community as well. But it's a common need. Organizations want to use an accounting software like QuickBooks because they're familiar with it. It does things the way that their bookkeepers expect them to work. And there's no reason to rebuild that functionality inside of FileMaker. So integrating with an application, whether it's QuickBooks or a similar accounting package, just makes sense from FileMaker. So I wanted to show a few examples of what we did. Usually it's pretty boring, the QuickBooks integration, because it just happens automatically in the background. But there are a few interface elements that are part of most of these kinds of systems, especially when you're working with QuickBooks Desktop. So there's often some a setup screen or something like this that's built into the FileMaker system that specifies how to connect to the system. If it's QuickBooks Desktop, there's usually a file path to that QuickBooks system. And then we may have buttons for allowing kind of big overall syncs of customers or items or things like that, and timestamps that show when that was last done. Every system's a little bit different, but throughout the system, there may be, indicators that show when something is ready to be synced with QuickBooks, a checkbox that the user can click to say that this sales order is ready to sync to QuickBooks. And then the system automatically picks that up and syncs it, and then shows the timestamp of when it was actually synced. It may also pull back a QuickBooks invoice detail to show when the invoice was actually created for that item or something like that. Here's the same thing on a detail screen, just shown at the bottom here of the screen. So these kinds of interface elements may be embedded in the existing FileMaker system in various places. There's another button up here where they can manually sync this item to QuickBooks. And sometimes it happens with a trigger after a status hits a certain value. Inside the FileMaker record, it automatically picks that up and pushes it to QuickBooks. Or there may be a scheduled item that pulls items from QuickBooks at a certain time of day, things like that. A couple of more examples. One thing I wanted to mention here was that login, the connections to QuickBooks or really any kind of API is really important to provide a way to troubleshoot when things do go wrong. So here's an example of the QuickBooks API log, and it's succeeding most of the time, but here's a failure for whatever reason. It's gave a particular error code. If they had a power user who could come in and help troubleshoot that, that's one thing, or they could reach out to us if they saw something like this in their API log, and we could certainly log in and review the details there when something like that happens. Other things that we have to do is transform the data in some ways. So in this FileMaker system, there is a mapping that has to take place for invoice items where, based on the product type and the order type, that maps to a particular QuickBooks item. And this interface gives users a way to set that up and manage it over time, add new values as they need to, and so forth.
So I want to give some results and benefits here that are maybe a little bit broader than just the QuickBooks examples, because certainly, while a lot of our customers do use QuickBooks or some flavor of it, there's a lot of other accounting packages out there. Some that we encounter a lot in particular industries include Vista Viewpoint or Computeries, Acumatica. Often there are ERPs that have an accounting component that's baked right in. There's Spectrum. There's various versions of Alpine or Mass and Sage, of course. And all of these different accounting packages, including QuickBooks, offer a mix of different opportunities and sometimes few opportunities for integration. In fact, one of the first questions we ask clients when we start to talk to them is what accounting package you're using, so we can understand to what degree we're going to have options or run into some obstacles. And so obviously this example is about QuickBooks and some of the options which are available there, of which there are many. So we're fortunate to have a lot of arrows in our quiver, but there are certainly other situations where we have to rely on other more traditional options of import-export and try to find ways to integrate and automate that. And we've got an example coming where we talk a little bit about the use of those more traditional methods. But the biggest issue here, I think, is that most of the businesses you run into, and this is true in peer groups and even here, it was for years, is that the accounting packages run in isolation from everything else. But they're somehow supposed to receive the summarized or transactional information from the business, whether those are sales, whether those are estimates, whether those are purchase orders or credits. All that information has to somehow find its home in the accounting package to be that source of truth, because eventually the financials are really the evidence that the business has of how it performed. And they're, of course, the ones that affect income statements. They're the ones that affect taxes and so on. And the amount of effort that we see businesses going through to take the operational business work that they do and to transfer it, transpose it, transform it into those accounting systems accurately is enormous. I think one of our clients was doing this, and they were losing about 3.5 to 4 days a week of their bookkeeper and accountant's time just doing that kind of work under the gun for Friday payroll activities in a union shop. And by doing the kind of automation we did there, it wasn't even QuickBooks, it was a different platform, but just by doing even some simple integration there, we got back 2.5 days of time. And so they didn't have to hire a second bookkeeper or accountant. They took this person who was doing all this really crazy busy work, under pressure, and were able to allow them to look more discreetly for quality issues, for accuracy issues, for things that were maybe incorrectly entered in the first place in the edge of the field or out in the actual work being done. So by integrating and getting sort of where the work gets done to communicate in either direction with the accounting system so that they are reconciled to one another, we find that not only stakeholder confidence improved and there's sort of not this wonder whether or not this is true or that is true. But you save a lot of time. And so that annual labor savings actually comes specifically from that one customer I was mentioned. And that's just an average. If you take, one or two people who have an accounting function, or take four people who spend a quarter of their time moving data back and forth to make sure that all the work they're doing over here in sales or project management or purchasing and acquisition is being properly recorded, and then validating that when they get reports back from the bookkeeper, it adds up really quickly. So I imagine this is an enormously conservative number. Not to mention the fact that that data is more accurate, period, in the end. If it's well built and tested, this idea that you have to move it and then confirm it and do twice the work to then correct errors and then know that you're going to have to do that again, all of that goes away. And you not only save the time, but you improve the quality and accuracy of that information.
All right, so the next example we've got is a law firm. This particular law firm works on some pretty big, high-profile court cases. They have a lot of exhibits that are managed through PDF documents. And so before we built the system for them, I believe they were primarily sharing these documents internally with tools like Dropbox and things like that. But they didn't have a good way to take all of the categorization, the kind of data information that they needed about each of those documents, and be able to merge that together well. So we built a FileMaker system that really gives them a rich experience. It integrates the FileMaker data, categorizes and tags and all kinds of things associated with each document. It scrapes the text out of each page of the document and provides them a really rich experience for viewing those PDFs, annotating them right inside of FileMaker Pro and WebDirect. And we even built an FM Better Forms app that mobile users can use to quickly view a document or share it with a colleague while they're out in the field or whatever it might be. So we use lots of tools for this. It's all built around FileMaker, but one of our products that we have is called Gloss. It's used for viewing and annotating PDF documents right inside of FileMaker. We also integrated with Tesseract OCR. We use extensively the Monkey Bread MBS plugin and DynaPDF, also FM Better Forms, and lots of other tools. This big flowchart is an example of the intake process for new PDF documents and all of the processing that has to happen for each document that comes in. So when they import these documents, we're running processes on them to OCR each document, to parse the text from each of those pages and put it into FileMaker to make it easily searchable and categorize it. We're adding exhibit numbers to each page in the PDF itself so that they can track those appropriately. They've got really rich integration with this FileMaker data, which allows them to access these documents very quickly and bring them back up when they need to. And the PDF viewing and annotating experience is really baked in there in a way that is just really seamless for users. Manages versions of those documents and all sorts of things. So lots of tools involved there. FileMaker, again, is the center of it. But one thing I wanted to call out here was that a lot of the processing that we're doing in this case, the integration with the third-party plugins, the MBS and DynaPDF, Tesseract, and things like that, all of that is happening on the FileMaker server itself. So we're not reaching out to an external system. In this case, it's all local processing. And we're managing all of that because of the sensitive nature of these documents. We couldn't use cloud-based services for the processing of these documents, and so it all needed to happen locally or close to a private environment to make that work. So I think those were the main points I wanted to make there. Mark, you want to follow up with the ROI and benefits?
So this is one of my favorite use cases, and that's because it's impossible to overestimate the value I think that this solution brings. These are not, your everyday divorce cases. These are very large class action lawsuits, often multiple law firms involved, um, thousands of documents, often with tens of thousands of pages. So enormous quantities of data, much of which is obviously part of their discovery process, but really hard to mine for information. And we all know historically, you put your PDFs into just a couple of PDFs into a FileMaker solution, and you may not be able to view them as well as you'd like. It depends on what operating system and version of Acrobat you might have installed. You have a different experience on mobile or web, if that's how your users access solution. And you're certainly not doing things like consistently searching and interacting with those documents. And more importantly, being able to go to page 17, find this block of text and link it with page 47, this other block of text, and then write something about that that explains that these are two examples of a critical piece of intelligence that's part of the manuscript review, the contract review, or in this case, litigation preparation. So they were doing this the old way, right? Lots of paper, lots of sticky notes, lots of data, PDFs sitting up in a folder on a storage mechanism with companion Word documents and other kinds of workarounds to help them create usable intelligence to help them win these trials. And so that's really where I think a big piece of the value comes for them. Not only does this let them drop their files in, get all that processing done for them in the background, but then it gives them a rich set of tools right inside the case management tool in FileMaker to weave those documents into their workflow. So Greg really didn't, he spent a lot of time helping to develop this technology in the first place and then eventually bring it to the community in Gloss. But this idea that it takes this document and makes it part of your data and not just an artifact that's sitting next to your data can't be understated. So they went from this mess to a strategic tool that kind of optimizes their ability to go to trial with a competitive advantage. It saves them easily $300,000 a year in effort. And I know that sounds kind of funny to say that for a law firm, saving time matters, but saving that kind of time so they can get to trial more prepared than the competition is critically important. There's always other opportunities for them to do work, so it gets them to the more valuable, meaningful work where they can actually apply their legal skills and acumen and not necessarily fight the limits of the technology and the volume of discovery. We've all seen that case where, in Law and Order, something where they drop 100 boxes of discovery of paper, and it's like, how are they ever going to get through this? Well, it's not much different in the digital space. It's equally hard. This makes it easier and makes it easier for them to win their cases as a result.
All right, the next example we wanted to talk to is actually what we're doing at Skeleton Key. We use a lot of integration between our systems, and I wanted to talk about a handful of those, probably not all of what we're doing integration-wise, but we use a lot of FileMaker databases. We also use HubSpot. We use Jira with Tempo. We use Microsoft Teams, QuickBooks Online, lots of different tools. So I want to give some examples of ways that we're integrating between those different systems. So the first example I've got here is we use a lot of scoreboards to help manage the organization. We're an open book company, so we share lots of information within the organization, and being able to keep those scoreboards updated automatically is really important because it takes a lot of time. Before we fully automated this particular scoreboard, I was the person responsible for logging into each of the systems, collecting and summarizing that data, putting it into the scoreboard. And I often spent a half hour, sometimes an hour, usually on Sunday evening, updating these numbers and stuff for our scoreboards. And now it's all automatic. I get an email that says it happened with a summary of the numbers and any errors that might have happened, but it's completely automated. It gets populated Sunday evening, and then it gets updated 10 minutes before the meeting occurs Monday morning. So everything is fresh and updated and always accurate. So that's a big part of this. And this particular scoreboard pulls data from HubSpot, from QuickBooks, from other FileMaker databases, from Jira and Tempo, and brings it all together to give us the numbers that we need. The interface itself is built into FileMaker, and we share that during our Monday huddle. The next thing we have here is we use FileMaker to create estimates for different scopes of work. And we push those estimates from FileMaker to HubSpot to create a HubSpot deal. For each of those, it helps us track each of our sales opportunities. And this is just an example of how we push data from FileMaker into HubSpot to create records there as needed. We also go, we sync contacts from FileMaker to HubSpot as well. So there's a synchronization that happens between HubSpot CRM, which is where we track all of the details about organizations that we work with. And then we pull in the relevant information that we need into our FileMaker systems, because that's where we're actually generating invoices and some things like that. So we need some of those details, the contact details, in various FileMaker systems, and this is just one way that we facilitate that. The next example is that, our developers use Jira to manage all of the work that they're doing. It's kind of a project and issue management system that's built for software developers. And it's a much more natural experience for developers to work there and manage that work than it is in kind of a special built FileMaker application or something like that. There's just so many rich tools that you get for managing that work inside of Jira. But we need that data in FileMaker to allow us to track the overall, progress on scopes, see where we're ahead or behind, and give us kind of those dashboards that allow us to manage the projects and make sure that they follow the estimates and things like that. So we aggregate a lot of that Jira data and pull it into FileMaker where we can use it. The other thing we do is we do our timekeeping inside of Jira in an app called Tempo, which is an add-on to Jira. And this allows the developers to track their time right inside the issues where they're doing the work. And that saves them a lot of time. It's a much more natural experience. But we need to pull that information out of Tempo into FileMaker so that we can create invoices, because Tempo by itself doesn't really generate the invoices or have the contract information that it needs in order to generate the invoices in the way that we want to. So we pull all that data into FileMaker, and we generate PDF attachments and send those to clients through email, and then push some of that data into QuickBooks Online for the invoices themselves. The next example inside of Skeleton Key is we use Microsoft Teams a lot. And this image is not a Microsoft Teams, it's actually a FileMaker interface. But Microsoft Teams is what we use as our primary communication platform, both internally and with our clients. And so we have hundreds and hundreds of teams and channels as part of our Teams environment. And it's really important that we keep the right people in the right teams and channels at the right time. So things are not too cluttered for everyone, but also from a security perspective to make sure that people have access to the right teams, but that we don't just put everyone into every team, right? So there's a lot of work that has to happen to make that work smoothly. And so we built a FileMaker tool to work with the Teams APIs so that we can create teams and channels and add our employees and also external parties to each of those teams and channels as needed. And this makes it much easier to do that than it is through the administrative interfaces inside of Teams itself. So here's a little integration diagram. There's probably other systems that we've integrated that aren't represented here, but we're always looking for opportunities to integrate and streamline our systems. And we want to use the best tool for the job. The salespeople really like to use HubSpot and the features that it has as a CRM and for tracking sales opportunities and deals and things like that. It doesn't make sense for us to rebuild that functionality inside of FileMaker. So we integrate with it where we can. And likewise, Jira and Tempo, the developers like using those experiences inside those interfaces. And it makes it just much richer for planning and tracking development work. And it all fits together well. So we don't rebuild that functionality inside of FileMaker either. But the FileMaker is kind of the glue that ties everything together. So it pulls all the right information from the right systems, puts things where it needs to be, stores some information where it needs to, and pulls it all together so that everything can work as efficiently as it can.
So there's an interesting backstory here. As an organization, years ago, in our early days of Skeleton Key, we had a singular FileMaker system and QuickBooks. We had our CRM was in there, our deals and opportunities were in there, all of our time entry was in there, and to whatever degree we had any kind of project management tools, they were in there as well. And in many ways, it was a monolithic solution with all of that functionality, sometimes with a few other FileMaker files orbiting around it. But as an organization, things change, right? We eventually evolved, got bigger. We added an IT division. We had people who were specialized in their role, right? I used to sell and project manage and develop, and suddenly I was just selling or just project managing. And as we did that, we discovered that we needed, a singular tool that could do more. So we actually adopted another monolithic solution that was built for the IT industry, and we all started trying to use that, but it didn't really fit really well. We discovered that there were people who needed to do project development or sorry, software development versus IT support, and the tools seemed really geared toward IT more than software development. So we struggled, but it gave us all this great stuff. It did our pipeline better than we had built it before. It synchronized with our accounting in a way that we had never gotten around to building before. When we sold that IT division, we had a kind of a sit down conversation, and Greg really made the case, I think, for an opportunity for us to do two things. One was to simplify our tools around best in class tools, right? So find a really good tool for the sales team, find the right tools for the development team, find an integrated communications platform to allow us to get rid of the 5 or 6 different tools we used for phone and video conferencing and email and messaging and calendaring, and try to consolidate those things. And so we'd still end up with more than one monolithic tool, but we would have tools that were specialized to different roles and parts of the organization. And one of the prerequisites was that those tools could be integrated, right? It gave us an opportunity to choose a tool that we knew was going to play ball. You all know, we know FileMaker is one of those really friendly solutions. I like to say it's the friendly kid in the playground who will share all its toys with all the other kids. But the reality is not all the other applications out there are as friendly. So that becomes a buying criteria. You'll become more and more of a buying criteria for your customers as well. And of course, all these tools have overlapping data, right? Not all the data, but they all share client lists, they all share staff lists, they all share project information. And then in various combinations, they have overlapping data about projects or customers or time or billing. And so as a result, integrating these different systems is inevitable in all different kinds of combinations. By doing this, not only do we get better syncing and less manual work, but the business processes that humans were enforcing inconsistently can be enforced by the software. So we can actually build in rules to when things get triggered and when things happen to ensure that the synchronizations are of high quality. So a great example for us is we assign an acronym to our clients to make them easy to talk about and kind of semi-anonymize them in certain cases, and really to make the team names shorter in those hundreds of teams that Greg mentioned. And we can enforce a business rule that you can't do this until the code has been established and has been confirmed as unique, and then that triggers like a domino all the other things downstream. But before, we would sometimes skip that step and start to get things moving in motion before we should have. And so we get the benefit of not just syncing and accuracy and labor savings, but we also get improved quality in our business process and enforcement of best practices. I'd estimate we're easily saving 2 or 3 people's worth of time every year having these tools integrated, and we still have a backlog of more integration we can do that allows us to evolve as people come and go from the organization. Sometimes they take the habits and patterns that they used before with them. We can automate some of those things to make it easier to replace them over time. All right, so we're near the end here. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions. We've just got a few more slides. I just want to share a few quick caveats, right? Greg has made this seem really simple, and it's not that it's hard. It is simple, but it's not easy to do, right? In the end result, we have these simple diagrams that show things connecting, but the devil's in the details. These are complex processes performed by humans with systems that speak different languages, that have maybe a common lingua franca, but they don't necessarily look at the information the same way. And they certainly have their own specialties, right? HubSpot is a platform that does all this stuff around marketing and sales. It's not very good at invoicing. It has an invoicing feature, but it's lackluster. We could do a lot more with invoicing in FileMaker. And yes, of course, QuickBooks has an invoicing feature too. So we really know that we had to figure out how to not just transfer information, but as Greg said earlier, transform it and use the right tool for the right job. The other thing is the more integrated we become, and the more integrated our client systems become, the more important it is to monitor those integrations, right? It's one thing to get them working and then hope that they keep running, but we've all seen how systems can fail. I think Greg had a presentation at DevCon years ago where he talked about like the log file everybody forgot about that eventually filled up the server. And so we've discovered that when we have critical integrations that people are leaning on, like sending emails and SMS messages to clients, we need to have some kind of way to monitor those. And so we've built various tools using various technologies like we've mentioned today to allow us to keep tabs on those things and know if they're failing or slowing down so that we can preempt an outage and kind of watch the technology that is supposed to be invisible behind the scenes and not just assume it's running properly. And like my puppy, not all the platforms make it easy, right? They're sweet, they're cute, they work really well, and then sometimes they just don't cooperate. So like we mentioned before with those accounting packages, you're going to find examples where you're foiled in your efforts to integrate using traditional methods, and you have to use some of those methods like we used with that document processing, where we're pushing and pulling data through various scripts and automation. You've probably done something with FTP or SFTP or import and export from older accounting packages. That's still a valuable, viable means of integration and still can be monitored to ensure that it performs really well.
So I've got a few slides here that I'm going to not spend much time on because just in the interest of time. But there's lots of details here about the types of protocols and methods that are used to integrate with various systems. And FileMaker supports many, many different methods of integrating. And it's a really rich toolbox for us as developers to be able to tie things together and make things work in a really smooth and automated way. So there's lots of script steps, things like that. I did want to mention Claris Connect in particular because some people may not be very familiar with that. It's another product, a cloud-based product from Claris that's a workflow automation tool that allows you to tie together FileMaker and many other cloud-based systems. So if it has a connector for it, it makes it super easy to connect things together and create workflows that automate various activities. So we use that when we can. It's a great tool, and but there are lots of other tools in our toolbox that allow us to integrate with various systems. Some of the things that we use are various API clients like Postman or Bruno for exploring web-based APIs. Those are great tools to help us understand what's possible. If someone brings us an API for a system we've never worked with, we'll look for their documentation. We'll look for, what do they offer in terms of documentation for their APIs. And then we'll pull out a tool like this and start exploring that API and see what we can actually do with it. And that helps us know what we're going to be able to do once we get into FileMaker and start writing code. There are other workplace or workflow automation platforms as well. We use one called N8N quite a bit, and there are many others out there as well. Those are just some examples.
Greg, can you answer one of the questions we have live now about that? As you look at platforms like Claris Connect, N8N, and Zapier, can you talk a little bit about how you choose between them for a particular problem and why, for example, we used N8N and where we've used it and found that it's a good fit?
Yeah, so we've actually been using N8N since before Claris Connect existed, I think. And each of these tools has different pros and cons. I think it's partly about the support they have for connecting to different apps or services, and whether or not it has the specific connectors that you need. Now, Claris Connect does allow you to create custom connectors now, so you can build a connector for whatever purpose you might need. But if it doesn't have one that's already pre-built that has the feature that you need. So it kind of comes down to just the speed of development and what's available, what's possible. Claris Connect is really easy. It is maybe not so great for really high volume things because that you do effectively get charged per execution of flow steps. And so there's a meter running when you're using Claris Connect that you kind of have to be aware of. So for some systems, that's not a good fit. But all of these tools have different pricing models, and the way they work is you just have to look at the details to see what's possible with its connectors and then how it's priced and how easy it is to customize or write code to get things done the way you need to.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
I know with Claris Connect and Zapier in particular, there's sort of a subset of scripts, triggers or actions that you can take. So there's a kind of a finite set, and it varies depending on the platform they're connecting to as to what you can do. And if you need to do something outside that, you kind of have to go a different route. Is that true of N8N as well? Does it have a similarly finite set, or is it more of a direct connection into the API that might be available? How do we compare and contrast sort of the not just the number of connectors, but the breadth of functionality that connectors enable in those different platforms?
Yeah, I would say N8N and some tools are a little more robust in terms of being able to write code, write JavaScript or things that can manipulate the data. Or do kind of custom connections to various services, whether it's N8N or Power Automate or other tools out there that give you kind of a richer development environment. With Claris Connect at the surface level, it's a little more like Legos. As long as it's got a Lego block the size that you want, and built for the purpose that you want to use it for, it's perfect, and they're really quick and easy to snap together. If it doesn't have the block that you need, though, if you need one that's half size or something like that, it's a lot of work to build that custom block. And so some tools make it easier. Some platforms make it easier to do that than others.
Great, thank you.
I also just wanted to mention briefly the Skeleton Key has an API template. There's a link there on the screen. I wish you could click on it, but you'll have to type that in or make a note of it. Maybe Mark can put that in the chat if possible. There's a great blog post there, but it's a FileMaker solution that has some pre-built scripts and features to make it easier to connect to various kinds of web-based APIs.
All right, so don't go yet, folks. There's more, but this is the last slide. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. I want to let you know that there will be a survey coming out after in an email to you. I think it'll also take you this in a browser right after the webinar ends, where we're going to ask you a couple of simple questions, and you have an opportunity to enter your contact information in for the drawing that we mentioned in the registration, where we're going to offer a free day of integration consulting to one lucky winner. So if you stuck around this long, you're going to get that, and you're going to be having an opportunity to brainstorm a bit with Greg and the team to see where integrations might serve your business. Otherwise, what you can do now is you can join the Claris community if you're not already a member. There's healthy conversations up there and great resources, lots of developers who can offer you their 2 cents about options for integration or platforms and techniques that work. There's meetups of all kinds around the country about FileMaker where that topic is discussed as well. And then, of course, we'd welcome chatting with you as well. If there's anything we can do to help, you can certainly throw that into the submission on the survey as well if you'd like. We ask a couple other questions in there about whether this webinar was useful. We'd love your feedback. Don't hold back. We'd love to hear whatever you have to say. And also interesting in what you'd like to see future webinars about. So we've got a kind of a plan for 2025 of the topics we want to cover. We want to make sure that we're serving the community and helping them. So please let us know. With that, let's see if I have any other questions we can answer in the last few minutes here. I've got a question from Matt. Insert from URL is always slower than running the same query from the command prompt. Is there any way to make insert from URL faster?
I don't have a specific suggestion for that. I mean, you can always use a plugin like Monkeybread or Base Elements to execute the same HTTP call another way if for some reason insert from URL is not working well for you. I'd want to know exactly where the limitation is, though. It might take some offline discussion about that one.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me, Matt. I think my email address will be in that reply as well. I'd be happy to kind of try to follow up and see if we can help. Let's see, got another question here. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm going to misread it. How much time does it take to implement an integration? How do you kind of get the order of magnitude of what's involved?
Yeah. So I think if it's something we've done before, it's often there's a learning curve to each kind of system that we connect to. The protocols and methods and things like that are often the same, but the devil's in the details about exactly what kind of information we have to exchange, understanding the FileMaker system and the data model of what's involved there. So there's a little bit of discovery or exploration that needs to happen to really get a lay of the land and what has to happen. And then how rich you want that integration to be. Like if it's just one connection point, you're wanting to pull down a list of contacts from HubSpot or something like that, that's pretty simple. But if you're wanting kind of live synchronization as fields are modified in each of those systems, and you want both of those to be kept up in to date in real time, it can get much more complex. So really, it starts with a conversation about what you're wanting to do and what your budget is. Usually, we can do some things that are pretty inexpensive and able to offer a lot of quick return or benefit, and then you can build on it over time. Once you get that initial connection set up and how that API works and where the documentation is for it, it's pretty easy to continue to expand that and add additional features as needed.
Great, thanks. Well, we should end as close to on time as we can. So I'm going to say, if you could advance to the last slide for the recording, that would be great, Greg. Thanks everyone for attending. Watch for that survey. Please give us your feedback. And after a few days of receiving feedback, I'll send out for some additional questions that we didn't have time to answer, or any questions that come in, I'll send out an email to everybody. Just try to provide a little bit more insight and get you guys off to your next meetings on time. Thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks all.